Welcome to New York Bio's virtual breakfast series, a digital program started in 2020 bringing you fireside chats with leaders across the healthcare spectrum. This week's episode features Manish Arora, founder and CEO of Linus Bio.
Good morning, everyone. I have 901. My name is Jennifer Hawks Bland, and I'm the CEO at New York Bio. A special thank you to the law firm Mintz for sponsoring this month's series of breakfast. We are very excited to be able to take a deep dive today with Manish Arora of Linus Bio. Some of you, I'm sure, saw him as a panelist on one of our panels last week at the New York Bio annual meeting. So this time we have him all to ourselves, and we're going to take a deep dive into what he's doing at Linus and what he's been doing before he started Linus. So with that, housekeeping. As always, we know you'll have questions during the course of our conversation. Please ask those in the chat or the Q&A box. And with that, I will turn it over to Derek to kick us off. Thanks.
All right. Thanks, Jennifer. Manish, really excited to talk to you. You are combining some of our very favorite things. I love talking about scientific origin stories. I love talking about how companies come together. And you have a company that I think is really, really interesting because it's not straightforward genomics. It's not straightforward blood biomarkers. It's not necessarily therapeutics. And it hits on an area of, I think, incredible patient need. So with that, welcome to the program. We love to start with an origin story. So how about you tell us a little bit about how you got into the area of science that you're in now?
Thank you, Derek, and Derek and Jennifer, thank you for inviting me. Pleasure to be here. How did I get here? So I'm going to share some personal stories. I come from a long line of nerds. My father loved education, loved teaching me. And what happened was when I was 3 years old, my family moved to deepest, darkest Africa. And as it would happen, we were living on the doorsteps of apartheid. So I couldn't go to school there, although there were several schools. And my father would teach me at home. And this was during Civil War. And my father, being an engineer and a water purification engineer, always had this huge passion for the environment. Fast forward, many years, my father always talked about his education at London University, how it was wonderful to travel. And there I am, experiencing my motherland in India. And I decided, I want to spend a few years doing research. I trained as a dentist, and I trained and then I did my residency in oral and maxillofacial surgery. So it was very focused. You're looking in someone's mouth with all these instruments, and you forget the world. But somehow there was something saying, I want to try my hand at research with a focus on the environment. And soon I started hearing these facts that just stuck with me for a long time. That so many of the diseases that we experience, they have both a genomic and an environmental component. Now, fast forward, we are in a time when genomics has contributed so much. There's been huge investment in genomics. But ask yourself, you see all these ads for companies that will test your blood for your genes and come up with wellness programs, give you a risk of Alzheimer's, whether it's accurate or not. There's so many companies out there. How many companies have you encountered that will do what the other part and a very necessary component of disease causality is there, which is the environmental component? There aren't that many companies out there. So I always felt that there is this negligence of the missing component. And for so many conditions, the genetic component is not the primary driver. We see this with Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, even autism that I study, and ALS, but the genetic component is the smaller component as best as we can understand. So that's where this, that's my origin story, this early childhood influences, coming to a place like Mount Sinai and generally the New York ecosystem, and just this passion that for the environment, because I do see that as the next big horizon in precision medicine.
Yeah,
I'll stop there.
Okay. I mean, it's funny for every Huntington's disease, you have several of the diseases where the picture is murky when it comes to genomics, right? And we're pretty good at maybe giving people, blanket risk scores, but really, it's a binary result. You either get it or you don't. And I think we've kind of developed a reliance a little bit on genomics because the narrative is you should, the narrative is great, right? You sequence the genome, you learn everything about, everything that's kind of within all of our cells. You break that code, and that was a little bit of the promise of the Human Genome Project, right? And I think what we've kind of learned is that it only really gets you so far. So I would also say that this, you have an entire department devoted to, exposure factors, right? At Mount Sinai, it's a little bit of, it's really interesting. It almost is kind of where public health hits the individual patient.
That's right. So when I first was recruited to Sinai in 2013, I had prior appointments at Harvard and the University of Sydney. So my focus was on technologies that can bring together genetics and the environment. And I would always say that this equation that we accept as dogma, gene by environment, is actually incomplete. There's a missing component in that equation. And that was, it was technology to complete that equation. That was my focus.
Mhm.
So when we first came to the department at Mount Sinai, my current chair, Dr. Robert Wright, he was at Harvard. He was my postdoc mentor, so he came here as well. And the department was actually called preventive medicine. And we said, let's bring this focus to environmental medicine. So we started building this lab. And, when I started in 2013, there was just 3 people there. Now we are, a team of over 50. We have 3 NIH centers there. And that's been a very strong foundation to just not only develop technology for academic purposes, but really be patient focusing. And so much so that now we have a program in precision environmental medicine, where the purpose is not just to, end at publishing a nice paper or supporting policy, but to be patient facing, to deliver something that can be in the clinics.
So where did Linus Bio come from? You can give us a little bit of background on Linus. I want to make sure that we do this now because as Jennifer and I were, sat there last week and we had this conversation on during the annual meeting. We kind of feel like we know a little bit of the story, but wind the clock back a little bit. Talk to us a little bit about what Linus does and really where the idea came from, because this has been kind of a long burn to get to where the company is today.
Absolutely, and it's been a wonderful journey. So, there we are developing this new hardware, laboratory technology. We have our own data science. And where do we, shine this platform? Because the core technology in Linus is a platform. And we wanted to pick a major public health issue. And I've always had, an interest in children's neurodevelopment. We have a very strong autism program. And organically, we started, collaborating around this issue of autism spectrum disorder.
Mhm.
I'll veer off on a little tangent to describe why autism is such an important condition, yet a challenging condition to study, and why
Mhm.
genomics has not given us the answer we are looking for. So it's a truly complex disease. We don't know what causes it. We don't know its origin. I always contrast it with, let's say, a COVID pandemic, right? The downstream consequences of COVID are very complicated. We can't predict what's going to happen to a person, but the origin is very simple. It's a single virus. We can use genomics to sequence that virus, say it's this mutation.
Right.
When you can't do that in a condition like autism, which has a complex origin, then genomics is always going to not be able to give us a full answer. So we said, let's point our platform towards this. Immediately, we started seeing answers that surprised us. I always say, we as scientists don't make discoveries. Discoveries find us. And we sort of ended up in this place where all of these results were coming out, and it was hard for me myself to believe the initial results. Fortunately, we had collaborations in Sweden where we had twins who were discordant for autism, even identical twins.
Mhm.
And when we tried our platform there, still we could see which pathways were disrupted in autism, which were not. So we have this tool now. How do we come to a point where we say, yeah, this is good academic science. Is it going to make a good business? And for me, the critical moments along the journey were first to replicate the daylights out of this, to stress test the science. So we went to Sweden, we went to Texas and New York and the UK and Japan, and we just kept trying this in different populations, stress testing our data science, our hardware, And it always, the results only got better. So then we invited the FDA. We said, hey, look at this technology. What do you think? And we got an FDA breakthrough designation. We also went to the European Union. We got CE mark designation there. And it's at that point I realized that this technology can be a business. But even that's not the full answer. Like, yes, you can have a business, but how do you want that business to help patients? So we decided that we're a platform, so we are not going to just become diagnostics, although we have a diagnostic piece that the FDA has reviewed. We, at the core, are going to be a platform for discovery. So we have 2 pharma contracts. We are doing 2 phase 2 trials. One of them is an autism drug. And we are providing molecular endpoints, but more importantly, the platform can provide insight into compounds that have yet not been tried out for autism. So we can identify novel pathways and novel compounds. So we always wanted to be a company that doesn't just deliver bad news like a diagnostic testing company. We want to be part of the solution. But autism will never have a single drug cure because it's truly a complex disorder. It's like saying, here's a pill that will cure your heart disease, your asthma, and your diabetes. That it's not going to work like that.
Right.
So what we said was we must also be directly patient facing. So now we are applying for CLIA approval, where we can provide regular testing to our patients and help their clinical journey. So once we knew that we could do all these things, we said, yes, now it's time to package this as a company. Fortunately, Mount Sinai has a long history of successful, launching successful companies. Jennifer, a few moments ago, you and I were talking about Barbara Murphy, who lived not too far from us, who was sort of our neighbor. And although she passed away recently, she started 2 companies, Analytics and Verici, both very successful. So I reached out to her. I said, Barbara, she was senior to me. She was my dean, offer me some advice. And she was very encouraging. So there was this scientific foundation, a lot of support through Mount Sinai. And then we decided, yes, it's time. It took us about 4 years to get to that point. We were already generating a little bit of revenue. We had an FDA designation. Some might consider that's a little bit, more mature a stage to launch a company. But for me, that felt like the right time.
Mhm.
Was there a lot? I mean, did you have a lot of sort of internal discussion within your colleagues at Mount Sinai, and did you struggle yourself with when to come out of stealth and to actually launch the company publicly?
Yes. So we Mount Sinai Innovation Partners, again, part of Mount Sinai has launched many companies. Many people in New York would know Semaphore in addition to Analytics and Verici.
Yeah.
So we had a lot of guidance, a lot of experience there. And if you look at the journey of companies like Semaphore, they stayed within Mount Sinai for quite a while. They were, generating significant revenue before they moved out. Right. So there was no great urgency. And Mount Sinai was again providing us with sufficient support that we could really, be at a stage where the company was well-rounded. Now, along this time, I was on the, on this bandwagon of fundraising. I was approaching different venture groups, and being a first-time founder CEO, there's the advantage of all this passion and love for your baby, but also a healthy level of ignorance. So I surrounded myself with people who had done this many times before. I said, look, there's so much I don't know. And as I was speaking to venture groups, I started developing this instinct of, okay, what's going to get me a deal that I think is going to, first of all, do right by the patients, because this has to be a patient-facing company, but also do right by my co-founders and, set this company up for success financially. And that's when I realized that, taking an extra year would actually help me just raise more money at a better valuation. Now, it also, I have to be honest, it was a good time to raise funding, but towards the end of last year is very different to what the market's.
Yeah.
So I was raising money at a time where it was the right time to do that. We actually ended up saying no to some deals because it just we couldn't find common ground between the the public health impact vision as well as the financial vision. In the end, we got 2 VC groups to co-lead us. We have several family offices. We raised a good Series A, and so far things are going well.
So Uh, I want to actually get a little bit more on what the technology is. We had a question when someone says, "Could you describe the technology a little bit more?" But before we do that, I actually want to talk a little bit about saying no to to certain kind of deals. So what was the deal like? You don't have to name names or anything like that, but were the venture groups kind of adamant about a particular business model? What were the things that they were what were the things that they were pushing for that went against kind of the ethos of what you were looking for?
Right. So for me, one of the main things was being patient facing and patient, having a patient impact. So
Right.
again, not naming names, there was one group that said we will raise a very large Series A, but by mushing together multiple technologies, and you
Mm,
will be, one little ingredient in this big
Oof.
soup. And for some companies, I don't want to discourage, well, that is great. You might have a technology that will work really well when other components fit in.
right.
You know, if you're my age, it's like kind of a Voltron, but that's
Mhm.
that's only a cartoon reference that people my age and older will understand.
Oh, we can use that reference. That's a good reference.
Good. So you by yourself you're not that powerful, but together you form this massive machinery that can do a lot more, and that's a perfectly. But that's not what we were. So I said, I'm worried how long that would take and what the final vision would feel like. And at other times there was an instinct, that would kick in because some companies, some venture groups were talking so much about the return, times two, times three, times 10 in a 5-year period. And I said, this is a highway of innovation. Of course, there will be exits. When it's time to exit a certain technology, of course we will exit. But this is a highway of innovation. We'll keep innovating. And I can't see this company just, if it is successful, just fizzling out in a few years and just becoming again part of a bigger corporation like that. So what I was looking for was venture groups that have a track record of staying the distance, being accepting of the risks that come with novel technologies, but also having a portfolio that I could collaborate with. Because I look at their portfolio, I said, oh, you have a bunch of other companies that I would love to work with. We can partner with them. So that is what I was looking for.
Yeah. No, I think that's really smart. And I cringed at the initial thing. We're going to bundle you with a whole bunch of these other things. You really kind of lose any level of control agency. If you get to be part of that big group, especially if you're not if you're not the main one, you're by definition an add-on. And as you know, and as a lot of people know, one of the real challenging things early on is, what does your cap table look like? And that's a recipe for a very difficult cap situation later on in any
Well,
company's
I'm
life.
sorry to interrupt, but I think if there are any academics, young academics out there, I think the initial challenge is not what does your cap table look like, but what does cap table even mean? Because when I first heard the word as a professor, I'm like, I understand the word cap and table. When you put it together, it starts
Yeah,
losing meaning.
you're
So,
like bank account, I get.
so
Cap table,
Yeah.
not so much.
which is why you have friends around you, people like Barbara Murphy, people like the Mount Sinai Innovation Partners. But sorry to interrupt, Derek. Please keep going.
No, that's perfect. That's perfectly okay. I like the semaphore reference as well, because I think from an entrepreneurial standpoint, the semaphore story was reasonably unprecedented in a lot of ways. They kept that company internal for a long time. I personally hadn't seen that playbook run like that before. And when that company launched, it was a fully formed company, significant amounts of revenues. It was doing everything from soup to nuts. It's not like they,
Yeah.
started and needed to build something. They basically got around to funding and just kind of kept running. And they were doing it outside the walls of Mount Sinai as opposed to inside. So I think one of the really interesting things now is that certainly within Mount Sinai's culture, you have all of that experience. And the entrepreneurial playbook, so to speak, is not just find a CEO, put some funding around it, and launch a company. There's actually a bunch of other different things that they can do, which I think is a really, really interesting environment to be in.
Yes, and again, that history, that experience, having those those founders there to speak with, and and just my own instinct, because as an academic, one thing that academic research is good at is being very self-critical. So I needed to prove this science along every front. And like you said, it's part of Mount Sinai's culture to not rush these things. Let's get it right. For me, this was the right approach, because at the end of the day, I didn't feel this pressure. Oh my God, if I don't get this VC funding in the next 6 months, this whole thing is going to crumble around me. It never felt like that. I felt this sense of safety that we will leave the walls of Mount Sinai when things are, looking pretty solid. And that allowed me to get these excellent partners. My board, the two venture groups that I've found I'm very happy with.
Talk to us a little bit about, so like, I feel like Derek, I feel like we're going to get to actually, right, what the platform is. But, but one comment you made earlier, which stuck with me, is when you were talking with funders and looking at funders, it was also important what their other portfolio companies were. Talk to us about that calculus and how that played into how you approached funders.
Right. So early on, myself and my co-founders, and I just want to, give a shout out to them, Dr. Paul Curtin and Dr. Christine Austin, my professional family. We worked together for a long, long time. So we sat down and we looked at, just things around. We had many, many conversations at the local coffee shop and such. We always had this, this idea that we need to borrow something from the playbook of these tech companies. So we wanted a VC group that had a diverse portfolio where it included a lot of tech companies, as well as enough companies in precision medicine. The reason was this: we're always looking at, we have very, very innovative data science, but we also have very innovative hardware. We have our own robotic systems, our own lasers. So we have the tech flavor. We're not like some companies that are saying, okay, we will send our samples to get analyzed on the Illumina platform, but then we'll just focus on the data science and do something innovative there. We have a hardware component. Now, to give you a very specific example, we are using some vision recognition and things like that. So one of the portfolio companies in one of the VC groups that's backing us has a top tier, scientific history there, multiple companies. So for me, it becomes as easy as speaking to one of the world's best, vision recognition engineers is just a phone call. It is just an email introduction, then I'm on the phone. So we wanted to not just take what I like to call dumb money. We wanted to take the money that will bring with it some advantages, these collaborations, these, opportunities for mutual success. On the others, the two things I was looking for were VC groups that have a track record for staying the distance. And for me, the distance were like, okay, they will stay past the 5-year mark, more like the 10-year mark. And that they're not averse to some risk. Because with a platform like this, yes, you're innovative, you'll have, the saying goes, multiple shots at goal. And I'm always surprised we use that saying in the US, because the men's soccer team is so bad. Although the women's soccer team, we are world champions in the women's soccer team. So maybe that's why we use that. But, and so I wanted a company that would say, hey, it's okay if you fail. And so that's what I was looking for.
We can change it to a hockey reference if we have to, if the soccer team isn't cutting it.
I don't know how the Canadians would feel about that. So
rugby, like, we got the whole. We can go through the whole.
Statistically, most of the time you need to shoot the ball and score. Although I suppose we can make allowances for own goals.
We're good at swimming. I think that's it. Yeah.
We can do
and baseball, since nobody else plays. So.
Really, between Voltron and sports culture, we could spend an hour here and actually never end up talking about the science. Yes. So what is it that you're measuring that's different? And I'd be interested to know what those initial conversations look like, because I could almost picture the conversation with the groups is like, yeah, we don't understand your platform, so we want to lump it into one of these things over here. Yeah, right. Exactly. So what is it that you're actually measuring? And what was it like to try to explain this to folks the first time?
So Derek, what you said is very astute and shows how much experience you've had in these sort of situations. So I'll explain the technology, but I'll come back to what you said when you said that, oh, we don't understand this, we'll put this in this bucket, and it was always the wrong bucket that I ended up in. So this was the scientific journey, a deep science, and one thing I didn't mention, I'll take a minute to mention it, is that in one of my discussions with my co-founders, we always said, look, those who are trying to solve big problems always end up focusing on two things. One is to get rid of something that's really devastating to humanity: poverty, climate change, war, things like that. On the other hand, there are people, very bright people, a lot of resources being put in to stretch the boundaries of humanity. Our cars are very comfortable now compared to when I lived in deepest, darkest Africa, uh, you know, uh, but we are still trying to make self-driving cars more efficient, more comfortable, safer. We're trying to, send people to Mars. So we're always pushing the boundaries of humanity. And I said, here we have an opportunity to do both. We can help address a major public health problem like autism, like ALS. And we're using a core theory. At that time, we had just published a book on a completely new theory, and Oxford University had published the book for us. So we were feeling very good with this deep scientific idea. And to answer your question more directly, what do we exactly do? Take a look back at how medical science is practiced. Most of us, each year we go for our annual checkup, we get a blood test done. That's a snapshot. We are a system that's always humming. We are a dynamic system. So it's like me saying, okay, I'll take a picture of this fellow Derek Brand driving a car, right? And I can zoom in and I can say, look, he still has a full head of hair. He looks healthy. He's driving this car. The car's in great shape. And it's this brand and all of this. However, what I can't tell you is what's the quality of Derek's driving? Is it Derek like all other New Yorkers driving, or is he from somewhere like Atlanta where they drive more? And that's because Jennifer's from.
Actually, one of the co-hosts spent a significant amount of time driving in Atlanta. Although I drove in New Jersey, so I'm going to just stop.
Oh, that's
now.
even worse.
It is even worse. It's the worst.
You can really use the worst, which is Maryland.
Right? Yeah.
So, the thing was, we take these static pictures of a dynamic system, just like I can't tell you the quality of driving, and it's even worse. I can't even tell you about what kind of conversation or what kind of thoughts Derek's having. So you have this entire missing piece from these snapshots.
Yeah.
For me, the moment the light bulb went on was about 20 years ago. When I looked at a tree that had been cut down, and I was always fascinated by this idea of time, not biological time, not circadian rhythm, but the physical concept of time. I said, how do we go back in time? So let me ask Derek a question. Like, I want to know what was happening to you at a molecular level 6 months from now, but at a hourly resolution. So the answer is, well, you have to draw 500 blood spots from me every hour. It's just not safe. We will never do that, because that is, you can't just walk around being cannulated. So the idea behind it is actually very simple. So when you look at a tree that has been cut down and you have growth rings and you start counting backwards and you find some rings are closer together, maybe there was a drought and the tree didn't grow. Some rings are further apart, the tree grew. You're doing exactly what we do at Linus Bio. We are building a temporal history, right? So we found these growth rings first in baby teeth, because I trained as a dentist and then I did my residency in surgery. So I knew pulling out teeth, yanking them out, I knew they had growth rings. But how do you measure something within these growth rings that are so tiny? We developed a laser system and a robotic system, so we could develop this hardware. But then let's take a condition like autism. We know babies shed all their teeth. So every child is going to give you 20 teeth, but they're not going to give it to you just when you want it, right? You can't line up and say, hey, hand me a tooth.
Give me a kid.
I know what Derek, I don't know what's considered okay in New Jersey, but in New York, we don't just yank a tooth out. So how do we then do that? So I said, well, which other tissues have growth rings? And hair does, right? So a single strand of hair, just looking at like Jennifer, your hair, we've analyzed hair that length and we can go back 2-3 years. So can you imagine your molecular history for the past 3 years at an hourly resolution, and we can measure 10 to 40,000 molecules. So everyone out there who's working on blood, think of it like this. Think of it that I could give you data that was equal to 1,000 sequential liquid biopsies, but all from a single sample. But then I'll do what Steve Jobs used to do. I'll say, look, one more thing, right? He would always do that. Just when you were like, oh, this can't get any better, he would say one more thing. During the pandemic, so many of our research operations shut down, our clinical trials, because nobody's going to come to the hospital to give you a sample of blood and risk getting COVID.
Yeah.
But here it's stable. You can just put it in an envelope and ship it to me. So our hair recruitment didn't suffer at all. In fact, we have hair coming in from Japan, from Mexico, all over the world. So we build this global database. So it has this last mile advantage of being very stable. It's like the hard drive in your computer. It's like this biological hard drive that you have that you're carrying with you that's constantly recording information. We just had to come up with a way of analyzing this and then building this temporal map. And that's where the other challenge came in. Most of our data science that is built around genomics doesn't need to worry about the time dimension because our genome is
Right.
Suddenly we had to come up with a whole new type of data science that can focus that treats time as a mechanism. So the time component became a huge challenge, but also one that allowed us to have more patents. We filed about a dozen patents. We have process patents, disease specific patents, and even data science related patents. So I hope I've conveyed what the platform actually does.
Yeah, no, you did, and I think it's interesting. I've thought about this a lot, where you think about the amount of sequencing that we can do, and very likely, if we get into a paradigm where everyone is sequenced, we're very likely to do it once. Maybe there's an opportunity to do it a second time, or maybe there's a reason to do it second time, but it really gives you almost a baseline of some piece of knowledge, but it doesn't tell you what you did yesterday. It doesn't tell you how you're feeling now, and it doesn't really give you any specific information about how you're going to maybe feel tomorrow, right? So it's the type of analogy I use now, would think about, is where we got to with diabetes, where we have a biomarker that gives you a very good both predictor and snapshot of what's actually happening in your body now. And it's a place where I think it would be very interesting to go, both from a predictive standpoint and from a precision medicine standpoint, because you're learning about actual physiology in a time where you can do something about it, right? It's not a risk score. It's not anything like that. It's actually trying to change the way that we think about care. So going through that lens, what are some of the ways that you actually talked with other folks about where this would be useful? You said you have 2 partnering deals, so I'd be really interested to know how those came about and what your strategy was for how you would fit into that paradigm.
Absolutely. So, our first and clear distinguishing point was that we are early in a field that has to grow, if for nothing else, to make sense of all the investment we put in genomics. Because we really believe that all that investment in genomics was absolutely needed to get us to where we are. But now we need to bring in this other missing piece along with genomics to make that a success. So we went to groups that had previously invested in genomics, and even if they hadn't, they knew more about genomic-based precision medicine than anything else. So we explained this. We explained how our platform was innovative, but we had de-risked it. Look, I said, look, the FDA has reviewed us. They've given us a breakthrough designation. They don't call it a breakthrough that easily. We have started talking to pharma companies, and we had 2 pharma contracts. So we've been, gone through diligence there, and we are generating revenue. At the end of the day, that is evidence as well. So we showed how we are not just another gene editing company, not just another sequencing company. We are different. However, we still are going to help patients through this precision medicine paradigm. So we are not completely separate. The biggest challenges were, when you mention FDA, you end up people thinking of you as a diagnostic company, and that comes with some negative connotation, like it's a binary risk. So, diagnostics is not a place where you want to be right now, and only as a diagnostic. So, which is why I needed those pharma contracts to say that we are actually doing clinical trials. These patients have already been diagnosed. They don't need our diagnostic platform at all. That's a bonus. If we end up being a companion diagnostic, woohoo, that's great. However, we don't need to be. We are providing molecular endpoints, and we're identifying novel compounds. So we are a platform that provides deep insight at a molecular level. And we can be patient-facing after diagnosis during ongoing therapy. So once we had shown evidence of that, we had reports from our own internal trials, that our internal patients. We showed how we have done repeated testing, and throughout the treatment journey, we have provided updates at a molecular level. And at the end of the day, for me personally, what really clinched with these two groups was when I met their principals who have stellar achievements. One of them has set up 5 companies, and all of them have been acquired and have gone on to do big things. He said, he told me later on that I never completely understood everything. And he said, I never do. But he said, I could see that you have a vision and the co-founders have a vision. So I have as much invested in the people as I have in the technology, because he says it's very hard. You could have 7 calls of diligence, but you will never understand the technology because you're not the area expert as a VC lead.
Mm-hmm.
I think being a founder CEO really helped me there, and having my co-founders with me to see that, okay, these people are really well-established academics. They're not doing this just for the money. Of course, there's a financial reward there, but they're not necessarily doing it for that. They really believe in this. I think they are astute investors who see that.
So this is kind of a good segue here. So on Linus website, you just list you and your co-founders. What does the company actually look like, right? Do you have outside folks helping you? And do you plan to be the long-term CEO of the company? If you have multiple pharma contracts, I imagine someone is helping you with business development, unless you are just a remarkably humble yet spectacular person who can do all of the science and all of the transactional work for the company too.
Yeah. So because our company is new, we are just onboarding everybody and setting things up. But I'll tell you that we are almost about a dozen employees. So
Okay.
the data science team is fully built out. It's led by Paul Curtin, a co-founder. The laboratory science team is led by Christine Austin. Wilson Sonsini are our general counsel, provide IP contract. We have a specialized FDA consultant. We don't need them full time, but like yesterday, we submitted our FDA application for ALS, our ALS biomarker. So we have a team that is dedicated towards that. The 2 groups that have backed us are Great Point Ventures and Bow Capital. So I have a very distinguished board. The independent board member is actually the founder and CEO of Farmers Business Network, who's also invested in the company through his investment arm, Divergent Investments. And his name is Amol Deshpande. So this is amazing group of people, somebody who's founded a multi-billion-dollar company using plant genomics, understands laboratory and data science. Then Great Point Ventures and Bow Capital have, they've invested in heavily in tech companies, but also in biotech. So we have all of these folks. We're just onboarding and operating, the lead operating and business development person. So we have a lot happening that's just not entirely visible on our website. But you're absolutely right. When it comes to deal making, it shouldn't be just me there. It needs to be somebody who's done this many, many times. So I have a lot of support when I go into meetings. I have my CEO, Kathy Ryan, my CFO, Kathy Ryan. So when I'm talking about the financial sides of the deal, I have Kathy with me, and she's right there, and she's done this 100 times before. So there's no ignorance there. How long will I be CEO of the company? As long as it's in the best interest of the company. Right now, I honestly believe I'm the right person for the job for 2 reasons. One is we tried having a professional interim CEO. It just wasn't gelling. It only lasted a few months, but we were in those discussions with a person. It just wasn't, it didn't feel right. But then somebody, actually a venture group that did not invest in us, but were very interested. They just said, you are too big, you're too mature for us. We invest at the seed stage. They sent me this article which said, here's a completely statistical comparison of founder CEOs versus professional CEOs. And they said at early stages of companies, founder CEOs consistently outperform outside CEOs. I said, well, this was an analysis done by a big venture group, and I forget their name. I'm an academic, so I'm going to go on PubMed and Google this, put in the same, and there's a bunch of academic articles saying the same thing. In fact, they say the opposite as well, that companies that have failed at an early stage are more likely to have an outside CEO than a founder CEO. So, I mean, there's all nuances, so I don't want any professional CEO to take this personally, but there is a time when a founder CEO can deliver a lot. I know a time will come when I will have to step aside, and I want to be in a position where I can be part of the interview process. I can sit down with my board and say, look, I'm stepping aside happily. It's time to bring in someone who knows how to run a company with 200 people.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And when we will reach there, I don't know, but I know there will be a time when it'll be in the best interest of the company to bring in others.
I think that's a really healthy way to think about that. And one of the hardest things is that, the company only, you only get, the company only goes around once, right? So your time to make a decision, you make a decision, and then the company is a different company tomorrow based on whatever decision you make, and you never get the chance to go back and do it again. So the challenge with all of that is that everybody's experiences are unique. That, every company is an N of one experiment, basically. And you can only hope that the company goes in the right direction after you make whatever binary choice you make. But that's part of the decision making. It's really, really hard because you don't get to see what it would have been like if you made the other decision. You don't get to run the experiment multiple times and see if there's any different results. We do have a quick science question that we can go to, and then we can actually build off of this. There's a question on whether you would plan to correlate something like this with fetal MRI.
So we have done with MRI, yes, we haven't done it with fetal MRI, but we have done this with childhood MRIs.
Okay.
Specifically for autism. Because there's a healthy amount of literature now showing that autistic children have different MRI features. And we are about to publish that paper, and we show that our biomarker correlates strongly with those MRI features, and also with the autistic features. What is interesting that we found there was that it provides additional pathways, because we are measuring molecules. So there is, we can mush it all together and say, look, it correlates with the MRI. But when you break down the pathways, we can say, well, okay, these pathways are more important. They're driving much of that correlation. And then some pathways are uniquely driving correlations with the autism diagnosis and not with the MRI. And then when we talk to pharma companies, we say, okay, let's rank these pathways. And we think these are the most important ones. And let's give us insight into your proprietary compound database. Let's map it to them. And they, we're talking with them about doing that. And then we can identify which compounds. So in a sense, we suck in all this data from the MRI, but the ultimate focus is always on how can we treat this patient beyond just giving them a diagnosis. And in that sense, having molecular pathways and existing compound databases has proven to be very useful.
Okay, good. I have a good segue for this here because autism spectrum disorders are complicated. The role of a typical diagnostic company is someone orders a test, the test goes back to the doctor, and the doctor talks about the news of the test. So how do you see your role as a company as either similar or different to that? What do you bring to the community that can help both doctors and patients? And as a sidebar, what's the appropriate role for Linus to play from a patient-facing standpoint, right? How do you fit into that into that spectrum? Because it's especially in a complex disease like autism, where it is very much not a standardized experience. How do you see yourself and the company fitting into that?
That's a great question. Something that we've spent a lot of time, me and the co-founders, thinking, what do we want to be? So first, what do we not want to be? We don't want to be one of those testing companies that just throws a piece of paper with life-changing bad news at you. Okay, you have autism or you have ALS, and good luck. No, we want to do more than that. So what we want to do is partner, and again, in the people who have backed us, their portfolio companies that are focused on providing services to families whose children have been diagnosed with autism. So immediately you join this network. I always say, we're going to share the stress. We've given you this bad news, but we're going to share the stress with you. And we're not there yet because we don't have our clear certification yet. But the day we start operating, we'll have this sort of network in place where we can say, look, we're delivering this news, but now talk to our team. It'll help you connect with services that are in your local area. Because we know that if you get early intervention in autism, you're likely going to have better outcomes. There's no point giving you a diagnosis and then saying there's a 2-year wait list at your nearest pediatrician. So we are going to find you that care, and we're going to stay with you. And I call this a virtuous cycle. Now, if the clinician that this person is working with and getting early intervention, they stay in touch with us and they provide us with clinical data and we provide them with molecular data, both sides get better. It's like the diabetes story. I always say, from a policy perspective, we have failed when it comes to diabetes. We are a nation that's getting fatter and eating worse and worse food. So all the risk factors are just constantly getting worse. When you look at a person with diabetes, their quality of life is almost as good as a person who doesn't have diabetes, almost as good. Because diabetes is the biomedical success story, but a policy failure. Same way in autism, we have policy failures that we just don't have the workforce to deliver enough care, because out of 100 patients that rock up at your clinic, about 50 to 70 of them don't have autism. They're just, stuck in this bottleneck, but they're going to be thrown out. But by the time they are thrown out, the kid with autism ended up waiting 2 years. So we can get rid of that bottleneck, because our negative predictive value in our test is close to 100%. So when we say you don't have autism, you can be sure you don't. So you don't need to clog up the public health system. So once you become part of this Linus ecosystem, we are with you throughout the treatment journey, and it's part of our model. It will be a part of a model that is sustainable through revenue and through partnerships. So that's the broad vision.
So do you work with, so how, I mean, and first of all, that's an ambitious and laudable goal, right? And second of all, how do you figure out which organizations to work with? Do you go out to patient advocacy groups that already work with patients? How do you decide what's the best path for Linus to achieve that goal?
Sure. So we onboarded a person, a consultant for now, but will join Linus, whose focus is entirely outreach. And then we are reaching out to folks who are impacted by themselves with autism, but also to the advocacy groups that support the family's point of view. And we are onboarding, key members from there into Linus. We're not just saying, don't just talk to us. We want somebody who works for Linus, but used to be there or is still there and has a joint appointment.
Right.
Because the family has to be the center of this journey. Right. So we bring these folks in, we understand what it looks like from the other side. And then we say, okay, what are the needs that we can fulfill here? And increasingly the needs are, we don't just want a diagnosis, we want all the other things that are happening, the anxiety, the ADHD that comes in, what are the clinical trials that are going on there that we should be watching out for? If you just go to clinicaltrials.gov, you know what trials are going on, but you don't get a sense of which one is where, which one is more suited for us. So we have become a source of information that can be shared with the family advocacy groups.
We've had two questions now on the genesis of Linus. Can you tell us why you named your company Linus?
Sure, multiple reasons. One was that because we were focused in dynamics, so dynamics and rhythm. So the Greek god of rhythms or music, in a sense, the son of Apollo. And of course, at that stage, Greek mythology is a bit murky. So you might find saying, oh, well, he was his cousin, not his son. And I'm not getting into the family dynamics there.
No
This is
family
not that
tree.
kind of show.
Yeah.
We don't cover that on the program. It's fine.
I'll say that for
our fact checkers are not going to be hard at work on this.
Yeah, that's the conversation for the Jerry Springer show, although I'm not going to get invited there anytime.
Yeah.
But so his name was Linus. Then, I analyze teeth for a living, and it's not a well-known fact, but Linus Pauling, the Nobel Prize winner, actually won 2 Nobel Prizes. The second one, the Nobel Peace Prize he won, was for analyzing baby teeth for radiation. And that was the key evidence that helped us think, oh, we need to stop above ground nuclear testing. This is not good for anyone. So there was multiple. After we named it Linus, this interesting fact came up in this Peanuts character, Linus Van Pels. So if you Google it, does Linus Van Pels, Google's autocomplete will fill it up with, does he have autism? Turns out Linus Van Pels, some of his characteristics, his repetitive behaviors, he couldn't make friends, are like autistic behaviors. That was just a happy coincidence. So that's where it came from.
So yeah, so we had a question about Linus Pauling and peanuts. And so the answer is all of the above. And
All
then
of the
Yeah,
above,
the
yes.
answer is just yes.
I just want to tell the people who own the copyrights for the Peanuts character that I'm not infringing.
it's not, no, you're not infringing.
The Greek gods can be upset, but I think they're
Yep.
that the statute of limitations are expired there.
Yeah, it's also interesting that Linus from Peanuts may or may not be related from a behavioral standpoint, but yeah, I don't think the Greek gods have terribly good patent trademark folks, so I
Yes.
think you're good there.
So
Okay, so go ahead, Jennifer.
One still, let's just stick with the patient for 1 second. I noticed on the Linus website you have a link to your Strand DX ASD test. Tell us, and it's for healthcare professionals only. Tell us what a parent would do if they are searching and they find this. What should a parent do?
Right. So right now it doesn't have full clear approval, so it is not available to patients. But we only officially opened doors around May, so it's very early days.
Mm-hmm.
But we put the Strand DX website there mainly for clinicians to start reaching out, and if they have inquiry, because we felt that, look, there has been some media around it. When we got our FDA breakthrough designation, there was some media. And we don't want to just leave it there. We want a portal there when clinicians want to ask, okay, what is this about? If you're going to open your doors officially in about 8 months to a year, what can we do? What can we tell our patients?
Yeah.
Right.
And we've always told the FDA that we will do this in a manner that, again, putting the family's interest in the center, not criticizing what these other companies that I'm about to mention, but there are many companies where you can just send your sample and they give you a report. And well, what do you do with that report? You take it to your physician and they were not part of the process. So in our application to the FDA, we have always said that we will be a test that can only be ordered by a healthcare professional. So the healthcare professional is part of the conversation from the beginning. It is an aid in their diagnosis. So think of it like a cholesterol test, right? Your clinician decides what that means because they know you the best. They know you what your cholesterol tests were, for the past 5 years. If you're always running high and it's still, the trend is looking flat, maybe you're okay. But if you were really low and suddenly it shot up to the same level, maybe this other person is not okay. So we'll always have that family clinician relationship as the center. So that's why it's just a venue for clinicians to ask us questions.
Yeah.
Okay.
So let's talk a little bit about the physician relationship, knowing full well that we have about 8 minutes left, but I think this is really important because I think specifically physicians within the autism spectrum disorders community are well aware of the fact that it's complex. They're well aware of the fact that getting certainty is very, very hard, right? So I'm really interested to know if, what your physician education efforts have been like and what the feedback has been like from the physician community, right? Because I think they are probably starved for tools that give them answers that they need, right? They know the tools that they have now all give them half answers that they have to both make sense of and then talk to parents and patients about. So what has it been like to talk with physicians about this and how have they received it?
So, of course, when time comes to talk to physicians and autism specialists, I start at the Mount Sinai Autism Center, and they're part of the discovery journey. So we get a lot of feedback from them. How would it look like to use it in clinics? And I've then reached out through my network and just gotten a lot of feedback, spoken to many different clinicians. They all say, it's this weird situation we're in that we know early intervention for autism would work. And there are many programs now being developed for early intervention, but we just don't know who to give that intervention to. The prevalence is 3%. We can't just give it to all the kids and 97% don't need it.
Right.
So, I always describe it as a very silly analogy. Currently giving, early intervention at the age of 4 or 5 is like putting your helmet on after your motorbike accident. You miss that critical window of opportunity when that intervention would have saved you, but afterward, it's not going to do as much, certainly.
Yeah.
Right.
So then we went to foundations like the Simons Foundation, which is the biggest funder of research in this area, presented to their board of directors. Many of them are clinicians. They did a media piece on it. So we're constantly reaching out. I'm speaking to folks at the Autism Speaks Foundation as well. And then eventually, we're going to do a study and publish actual data on how it was to use this tool in an actual clinical setting. We, of course, start that at Mount Sinai clinics and a few others. I'm doing a similar thing at a clinic in Sweden, so that we get independent validation of what we find, and publish that data, and then start speaking to like the American Medical Association, the various pediatric societies, and say, this is what we have. Let's start seeing how clinicians can benefit from this.
Yep. So it's go ahead, Jennifer.
No, go ahead.
I was going to say, it just sounds like you're early on in that process, but you're thinking about it in a way that this is going to be, it's an important group, it's an important process, and you probably know it's going to be a little bit complicated, but
Yes.
You seem very nicely prepared to go and handle that.
Exactly, and it is early stages, so it's it's something that we are planning for, but it hasn't been fully executed yet.
Mm-hmm.
So can we shift gears just a little bit and talk about how you have found the process to be growing a company, clearly in stealth, like maybe for longer than other companies would have chosen, but talk to us about growing it in New York and what the plans are there.
To be honest, it's been a wonderful experience, and not just because I live here, I'm a New Yorker, and I work here, but there are certain advantages to being in New York. For example, the immense diversity. Mount Sinai Hospital is in East Harlem, Upper East Side. We have every kind of ethnic, racial background. We have economic spectrum there that you hardly see anywhere in the world. You walk 20 blocks and it's a completely, you go from one end of the income spectrum to the other end. And so we have this excellent patient base in such a small geographic region. We also have, world's best universities. I mean, Mount Sinai is very good. So is Columbia, NYU, Einstein, Weill Cornell. We have all of them, and you could literally walk to them, or certainly take your bicycle and get to them. If you didn't get hit by a yellow cab, you should be you should be fine. And
caveat there.
Yeah.
Caveat. Wear that helmet, like I said. So, New York is just an opportunity waiting to happen. It's just going to boom, and I can sense that. And plus, Boston isn't that far, and Boston is already a huge force in biomedical discovery. Our company is a resident at J Labs. It's such an amazing facility where you can lease lab space, you can contract, but they don't behave like they're your landlords and you're a tenant. I need advice. They said, oh, we have someone at Johnson & Johnson, and you can speak to them, and they're head of neuroscience. Talk to that person, get some advice.
Right.
So we have all of these things happening in New York, and plus, I'm from Mount Sinai, so I want to stay close to the mothership in this early stages. All of those reasons, for me, New York was the right place.
Well, we're biased, of course.
Yeah, no, that's the right choice. No, exactly.
Derek wants you to move to New Jersey, but that's...
No, he doesn't. No, I live on 112th Street. I am all pro Manhattan.
I thought you were from New Jersey, but okay.
Well, I grew up in New Jersey. I learned to drive in New Jersey, but I live here, and I have been banging the drum about how great New York is for starting businesses and just the fantastic underlying scientific environment. No, I am the biggest cheerleader for New York that you will see.
So we only have 2 minutes left. So talk to us about, you've talked about sort of long-term plans, right? And where you see things going. What's next for you and for Linus in the next 6 to 12 months?
So absolutely. So, we've almost built out our entire team, and for us, the next milestones are to get clear certification so we can start actually helping patients, keep growing our scientific base, because, it becomes important for us to have this, this impact on multiple disease outcomes. We are currently working on autism and ALS and ADHD. But we also have, pipelines for GI disorders like inflammatory bowel disease and
that's interesting.
And lastly, we have a lot of interest from Europe, where we have full clearance. We have a lot of interest from Japan, where we have a long-standing partnership. So we want to start delivering this globally. And lastly, we have 2 pharma contracts. We want to finish them to a point of success, and then start engaging those same pharma companies for bigger contracts, but also bring in new pharma deals, because we are a platform. We should be helping more and more partners in achieving their goals.
Well, it has been our pleasure to have you as our guest today. We certainly are rooting for you to achieve those goals. And we just thank you so much for sharing more information about you and about Linus with the New York Bio community.
Thank you so much for the opportunity. It was a pleasure.
All right.
Thank you.
All right, thanks, everybody. Have a good day.
Have a great day.